Welcome to our countdown of the most listened to episodes for 2022. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmanOnline.com. A reminder that the viewpoints expressed in this podcast are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I am so excited that you are here for this. I look forward to it every year. We are counting down the top 10 Craftsman Online podcasts for 2022. Just a quick note, our data comes from Apple and iHeartRadio. They do all the math. They've compiled the download and plays along with the listens and likes of our episodes since January 1st, 2022. So for the next 2 weeks, you and me, we're going to be counting down the most listened to episodes until we get all the way up to number 1. And along the way, we'll have conversations and discussions with our guests from over the year. After we hit number 1, you can join me as we kick off our 3rd season of the Craftsman Online podcast with our first new episode releasing Monday, January 2nd. All right, you ready? Let's go.
Number 10.
And coming in at number 10 is the meaning of conductors. On this episode, Worshipful Brother Jason Lee, he's the past master of St. John's Lodge number 11 in Washington, D.C., was my guest. Brother Lee shared his insights on the importance and the deeper meaning of our degree conductors.
At your point in becoming a Mason, you're hoodwinked. This is something that is happening to you. You're not participating in it. You have nothing but questions. There's the possibility that there are hands touching you that you have no idea who they belong to, and you really can be expected to be on high guard. But if you're listening to those lines and you understand this is a choice that I have made, it's something that I want to do, and there's someone here who is conducting me through it, I can let go of that autonomy and be part of this. Now, fast forwarding 10 years since my entered apprentice degree and the realization of the importance of these conductors and focusing on the fact that I have no idea who my conductor was. Nobody can tell me. Conductors are an afterthought, but really fundamentally at every level of the degree, they are the most important person. You know, I was having a thought about this for those of you listening at home who don't know. Your gracious host also provides a list of questions. And if you read them, you realize how much you don't actually know about the subject you're trying to talk about. So I was doing some study before I got on. I started recognizing that, particularly in our lodge and in most lodges, the conductor is almost an afterthought. Yes, it's on our list of cast members that we have to come up with. But aside from the conductor and everything after the big reveal, you could literally have a speaker in every corner of the lodge and just play recordings, and no one would know that you weren't doing it live. Obviously, if you recorded it from a 78 onto an MP3, you'd have some static. But the reality is, I know people who in 45 minutes of editing could piece together the entire, all 3 degrees, have it set up, laser trip lights. So as you walked by, the degrees started playing. You would never know that there wasn't a human there, but for the fact that there is a person guiding you through this process. And as the candidate, as the Mason being escorted, conducted, you don't realize that you are being put closest to the altar. You don't realize that you are being faced in the directions of importance. You don't realize that you are being vouched for through this journey. And the significance of that conductor, I think, is really being lost. If that conductor was your conductor for all 3 degrees, if that conductor was also the person helping you study your catechism, if that person was, you know, like someone who was guiding you through the process and conducting you through the experience.
Number 9.
With the dramatic rise of Freemasonry in the 18th century, art played a fundamental role in its practice, rhetoric, and global dissemination, while Freemasonry, in turn, directly influenced developments in art. In the modern age, art continues to be a powerful form of expression. Brother Ari Rosimov is an accomplished Masonic painter and artist who talked about the inspiration behind his favorite subject, Hiram Abiff, in our 9th most listened to podcast episode.
Hiram, of course, is fundamental in Freemasonry. And of course, that makes him a metaphor. And he's a metaphor for basically, he symbolizes basically all the Masonic ideals that there are in Masonry. He represents also the universality of the Masonic teachings and the Masonic morality. And in a sense, I would say every single Freemason can be Hiram. So when I depict him, I don't want to, let me point out two things. I don't want one particular face, because he could be anybody. And in that sense, in the dramas, whatever, people portray different people and people personalities. So in a sense, anyone could be Hiram. There's no, they paint portraits of people from history. They paint pictures of emperors and religious figures. No one really knows how their physical features in any event. So it's really an old tradition. But in Hiram's case, I think it's more important because of the symbolism of him in Freemasonry to paint him different. In that case, I think it's a very important thing. And also, very often we'll see depictions of Hiram Abiff, which basically look like wax figures. They're two-dimensional. I want to paint him as a human being, which is even more important than the differences in appearance, because he can only mean something if he has a human personality. I have a very symbolic triptych. It's 3 paintings, which basically depict 3 aspects in the development of Freemasonry. The first panel is called Foundations, and there you see the very beginnings. The story starts from bottom, you move upwards, you see the builders, you see Hiram Abiff standing there he's holding out the square, and the other hand he's got the compass. To his right is King David, to his left is the King of Tyr, the second Hiram, that confuses historians to this day. And then we move upwards, we have the cathedrals, we have Masonic chivalry, which I show I show a knight in armor, basically, a Masonic knight. And then we move upwards into the modern age, which is the cultural aspect of Freemasonry, the arts, the tradition. So I included numerous personalities and the world of literature and philosophy. Also, I have authors like Oscar Wilde, Mark Twain, the Russian poet Pushkin, Mozart, composer, and I even included Voltaire. And they represent the modern. Now, the second panel is called Eclipse, which shows a world in darkness. Part of it still survives, but it's a world that is in ruins based upon the misdeeds of people. But within the darkness are those looking for light. So you see within them, there's a group of people that are facing the light. And there's the square compass. Hiram is standing there. King David is at the altar. And that shows the road to the third and last of the paintings, which is called Rebirth. And there I have King Solomon's Hiram, and King Solomon is holding he's actually releasing a dove out into the open space, which is, beyond the ruins. Because in the other painting I show, in the middle piece, I show ruins as well. So here, he wants to know if everything is clear. And you see people building again, building civilization. It's called Parable of Light and Darkness.
Number 8.
Some Grand Lodges openly discount esotericism and consider pursuit into the deeper meanings of our ritual to be the substance of quote-unquote fringe Freemasonry. This term was new to me in the conversation I had with Brother Angel Millar, who outlined these mystery schools, who they are, and how multiple diverse systems of degrees and orders outside of Freemasonry were influenced by our Masonic ritual.
So French Freemasonry really begins during the 18th century when the craft spreads across Western Europe, especially through France and Germany. And there you get all kinds of new quote-unquote Masonic orders and rites being created, sort of rubbing up against each other, overlapping with each other, competing with each other. And some of these are strict observance, which claim to have a Templar origin, but again, claim to be Masonic. And another order, which I actually write about in the Fringe Masonry issue of Fraternal Review, is the Asiatic Brethren, which again, Masonic, but focused on Kabbalah and on interpreting and translating Kabbalistic texts. The Kabbalah, of course, was originally a Jewish mystical theology and was incorporated into Christian thought a few centuries before Freemasonry really spread across Europe in the 18th century. And later, of course, would impact the Western occult tradition. But there were other orders as well, of course, such as the Egyptian Rite of Freemasonry, which many brothers probably would have heard of. Again, although it claimed to have an Egyptian origin, was again influenced by Kabbalah. Many of these rites and orders were influenced by Kabbalah, alchemy, Hermeticism, and Rosicrucianism, as well as Christian chivalry as well, and the idea of knights. And this at least partly goes back to Chevalier de Ramsay's oration to the Grand Lodge of France, where he associated Freemasonry with knighthood and with Scotland. Obviously, Scotland had a long history of Masonry, but associated it specifically with Scotland and with knights, the Crusaders, and from there you get these sort of knightly orders. So, of course, if you look at the Scottish Rite, you have various knightly degrees. If you look at the York Rite, of course, you have the Order of the Temple in particular, as well as other knightly degrees. And the word Scotland becomes important in French Freemasonry. And of course, today we have the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. And that itself was really born in these sort of fringe Masonic rites in France of the 18th century. But that has become, we might say, regular, whereas many of the other rites just disappeared into history or may still be going in some form, but really are very, very small with very few practitioners.
What's interesting about this topic is that there's a lot of history in Freemasonry around the Revolutionary era. I would say that's when this was really starting to churn,
right,
as the world was growing.
Yeah.
When you say fringe Freemasonry, you're not talking about what I thought of immediately, which would be things like the Odd Fellows or the Elks or Knights of Columbus that could loosely be associated with Freemasonry. Nor are you talking about people that we would identify as like enemies of the craft.
No, right. So today, of course, we have the York Rite, the Scottish Rite, and various other orders such as the Knight Masons, which are all part of mainstream Freemasonry in America, for example. But during the 18th century, you get these different rites and orders being created, much like the Scottish Rite today or the York Rite. And some of them are conferring the craft degrees, and some may not be. But they are claiming to be Masonic, and but they have a different take on it. So the Asiatic Brethren, they are focused on Kabbalah. And again, the strict observance claims to have a Templar origin, but claim that it's a legitimately Masonic as well. So it would be more similar to the York or Scottish rite in a sense. But while we recognize those rites, we don't recognize the strict observance or the Asiatic Brethren or the Egyptian rite of Freemasonry. But they would have claimed and did claim to be Masonic, and in some sense were recognized on the continent as being Masonic, because all of these rites were with some degree in communication. So
it's the top 10 most listened to podcast countdown for the Craftsman Online podcast for 2022, and we've landed at number 7.
Number 7.
Masonic education has regrettably been reduced to teaching protocol, traditions, and catechism, while ignoring the esoteric essence of ritual. My guest, Most Worshipful Sean Bradshaw and Worshipful Brother Benjamin Wallace, are co-authors of the book A Path to Providence, the creation of the Middle Chamber program, which is active in the jurisdiction of North Carolina. In this episode, they outline the challenge in creating value in Masonic membership that goes beyond paying our yearly dues.
The brethren who find, at least this is my take, the brethren who find value in the fraternity will be willing to pay for that value. We sell the fraternity cheap, but frankly, what we provide, generally speaking, in most lodge experiences, is about equitable to what's being paid. I mean, you pay, I don't know what dues are in New York, but here in North Carolina, the average dues range in the 85 to 125 per year. And you're not going to get a lot out of that. You're not going to get profound experiences typically. You'll make some good friends. You'll give yourself opportunities to do some good charitable work. But there's other parts of the craft that we miss out on because we sell it cheap. And because we sell it cheap, we just don't have the funds, the capability to provide other, more profound experiences. But more than that, it also keeps us, like, I think, on this hamster wheel of, well, if we only had more members, then we can retain a lower due structure, and then we can still pay for this building that we've got, which is in some cases, a white elephant. In other cases, we absolutely have to keep some of these buildings. They're treasures, but more often than not, they're money pits. And so we delude ourselves into thinking the answer is members, when in fact the answer may be going back to the true values of the craft in its original state.
Yeah. So 2 points in this. This is pretty a wide-ranging topic here we're on right now. But one is I want to point out in the membership drawdown that Sean and I both own businesses, and every businessman knows that in apparent disaster or downturns or hardship is opportunity. It's almost a esoteric truth. It's certainly a business truth. I'll tell you a true story. So my dad has a good friend who is like a multimillionaire, and they were on vacation. And when Black Friday hit in like 1986 or 7, I can't remember when that was, and they saw it, they were in a bar on vacation, and they were watching the stock market. And my dad's friend said, "Oh my God, I have lost a fortune." And my dad said, "What are you going to do?" And he said, "I'm going to buy like hell." And he did, because that's the way that businessmen think. This is an opportunity for us. This membership drawdown, MSA finally got their numbers up after we published our book. We're down in the 800,000s now for membership. We're continuing to crash. And nobody knows where this is going to bottom out, but we have not hit the bottom of this membership drawdown now. But this is both a disaster, but at the same time, there is tremendous opportunity here to get back to our basics, which was the other thing that you mentioned in your opening statement. And what that means to me is get back in your doggone ritual. Get back in your ritual. Your ritual has the secret of Masonry. It has the key to unlock, use a Scottish Rite term, all of the things that are going to make the individual Mason become a more, get this, Sean, noble version of himself, which is the goal, right? We were talking about this yesterday. And so that happens in ritual. You just need to get under the allegory and the symbolism of it. So that's what the getting back to basics is.
Yeah, I echo that thought completely. I was invited to speak at a Brother Bring a Friend night, and I looked into an empty lodge room and was thinking of the days, and I'm sure you were touching on it as well, the days when we had 300 members in a lodge, and active members that would attend a lodge would be in the 100s. Heck, in my mother lodge, I've been told stories that if you wanted to get in line, it went around the door or out the door, around the block, and around the corner. I mean, there was so many that they were starting to create other lodges because there just weren't opportunities for brothers to become the master of their lodge. It was never going to happen in your lifetime. And here we are now standing in this room, and there's 12 guys. And I said, how many men do you know in your life? How many men do you think are over the age of 18 live in this city or this town that we're in? And how many of us are in this room tonight? Maybe we have to get okay with the idea that Freemasonry is not right for every man. And not every man should be a Freemason. And that's okay. And I think it kind of goes hand in hand with the other part of it, which I'm also witnessing a huge push, and you've mentioned it in your book as well, getting back to the traditional observant style of Freemasonry. And I think that when men are talking about the back to basics and getting back to ritual, that's what they want to get back to, is have a lot of the extra distractions let's say that come with lodge night. Take that out and get back to what you're supposed to be there for. Yeah, the dinners and the social aspects are great, but that really shouldn't be the primary focus of going to lodge night once or twice a month or whenever your lodge meets.
There is something to be said for men needing what Bob Davis would call the mature masculine experience. Men need to be around other men, and we're so disconnected these days because of social media and because of the rise of the family unit in a way that it didn't exist before. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but there is a need for men to be around other men who can influence them, and not just drinking beer and watching football. Nothing against either of those. I like them both. But I like being with my brothers when I have a feeling of importance about what we're doing. When I'm wearing my tuxedo, when we're going to a nice dinner, when we're doing prescribed toasts, there's something that doesn't resonate with every man there, but I think it resonates with a lot of men, and I think it's important that men get back to this shared experience to understand what mature masculinity looks like.
Number 6.
In this episode, we discussed how Freemasonry is not a religion, although there are many biblical passages and spiritual principles present in our ritual and in the teachings. Worshipful Brother Jason Marshall is the author of the book The Path. He detailed his research into exploring the 7 major religions in the world as they relate to ancient craft masonry.
And before I joined the fraternity, a lot of people have never studied these other world religions at all. They may know, just a little snippet or of the teachings, and that's their only understanding of it. For example, Hinduism. You bring up Hinduism, they're like, oh, well, they have lots of gods. There's yoga, meditation. That's about it. That's all they know.
Does that surprise you that a lot of Freemasons are not familiar or haven't really researched any of the other religions?
It doesn't surprise me. It's sometimes disappointing, if I'm going to be honest with you, because I think that our ritual tells you to study. And even though, especially, the craft degrees, the Blue Lodge is very much in the Christian tradition. York Rite's obviously also rooted in the Christian tradition, but the Scottish Rite, for sure, at least on the southern jurisdiction, which is where I'm hail from. I'm not quite sure what the northern jurisdiction is. Their teachings are, but for sure on the southern jurisdiction, Scottish Rite, I mean, there's stuff from the Sufi tradition, Hinduism, even a little Eastern, Taoism kind of sprinkled in. So yeah, that's all, it's kind of disheartening. It's like you join this group that tells you that you need to look at these religions and that we're all under the brotherhood of man and whatnot. But you obviously haven't spent any time looking at this.
And I find your story very parallel to mine, where I also grew up in a small town, Everyone seemed to practice one faith that was very predominant throughout my life. When I moved out of that small town in Arizona to upstate New York and was introduced to another predominant religion that is up there, I went from being a Southern Baptist to being really steeped in Catholicism, and mainly the Roman Catholic branch of that. There are other religions, of course, but that was very predominant there. Massive difference, still Christianity, but just completely different ways of worship. That was a bit of a culture shock to me. And then it was one of the questions that was rolling through my mind literally as I was looking at my application to petition for membership to my mother lodge was, do I believe in the existence of a supreme being? And I really was like, yes, but I couldn't tell you which one. I think that there's this bigger thing than me, obviously, yes. But if I'm to say, and that was like my first holdup in becoming a Freemason. What was then interesting was, and maybe you've shared this experience as well, during the first degree, I had asked, like, is Freemasonry a religion? No, it's not a religion, not at all. And I'm hearing a lot of religious references. Actual parts of the Bible are being used in our ritual. Prayers are based on that. The story of King Solomon's temple based on. So there is a lot of religion in Freemasonry. How do you explain that to new brothers or new members that are like, whoa, where did all this religion come from in Freemasonry?
It's funny. I recently probably had a 2.5, maybe a 3-hour conversation with a potential member about this, that no, Freemasonry is not a religion, but it very much grew out of the Christian tradition, which especially, again, in the Blue Lodge degrees, the building of King Solomon Temple, I mean, that go back to Judaism. But, there are numerous Christian references from the prayers to the scriptures that are utilized. So you can't really get around that Freemasonry does come from the Christian tradition, and which makes sense because Freemasonry started as a guild. I mean, a stonemasons guild. Well, they were building churches. So, I mean, it just kind of makes sense that the ritual would come from the Christian tradition. And that's what I ended up telling the prospective brother, that, look, Freemasonry utilizes Christianity as a framework for the different rituals and teachings. But, and again, in Oklahoma, and I'm sure other religions during, especially the inter-apprentice degree, there's lots of admonishments that, nothing here is going to conflict with your religion or your own God or family or anything else. And that's the deal, is that, look, we're not trying to we're not trying to replace your religion. We're not even necessarily trying to supplement your religion. This is its own tradition that has teachings. And that's one thing that I noticed as I started studying and meeting various teachers from other religions. A lot of times they don't even refer to their own religion as, quote, a religion. It's, this is my tradition. And that, even though it's just a different word, is actually really powerful, because it's saying, look, I'm saying that this is the tradition that I'm familiar with. I'm not trying to say that your tradition or religion is incorrect. And then I think when you drop the religious term, sometimes the guards come down a little bit, to where I'm not trying to convert you to a different way of thinking. I'm just explaining that in my, again, tradition that has this view of God and these teachings to become a better person. So that's just my tradition that I'm coming from. And again, Freemasonry is an esoteric tradition. It's not a religion.
Well, my friend, we are halfway through our countdown of the top 10 most listened to podcast episodes from 2022. If you're interested in hearing the full episodes on our countdown, no worries. Look for the links in the episode notes for this podcast. And come back next week as we continue our countdown to the most listened episode of the year. If you've enjoyed the show and you want to hear some more, just tell Siri or Alexa to play the Craftsman Online podcast. We're available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.